Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Twist of Fate by Takuku. A one-piece AU where everything changes in the aftermath of the fire at Grey Terminal. Instead of staying behind, Luffy and his brothers set sail early, and fate throws them straight into the path of Marco and Thatch from the Whitebeard pirates. From there, their journey takes a whole new turn. Huge shout out to all the warlords of this channel. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
Sabo massaged his temples. He felt a headache coming on. Not only did Ace completely lose it and tried to attack the Whitebeard pirates, but now Luffy wanted to draw on his face. Sabo would have let him do it under any other circumstance. However, he didn't need Ace to become even more irritable than he already was. And to top everything off, he still needed to interrogate Marco and Thatch on why they followed. He could only count his lucky stars that Ace was unconscious right now. But it'd be funny. Luffy pouted while holding a marker inches away from Ace, who was chained to the mast of the small boat. "No, Luffy. You can later if he has a narcoleptic attack, but now isn't the time," Sabo explained for what felt like the 100th time. HMPH, Sabo's no fun, Luffy sulked and put the marker away. Right now, Sabo was just glad that he left it. He had to focus on their unexpected guests, and he couldn't worry about Luffy getting into trouble right now. Sabo turned to said guests, and asked, "Why are you here?" "Why not?" Thatch shrugged his shoulders, which irritated Sabo. He was thankful when Marco elbowed his ribs. "Look, I'm going to be level with you. We followed because we aren't going to let 3 kids sail around by themselves," Marco said, and Sabo was glad that someone else other than him knew when to take a situation seriously. He didn't appreciate being babied, however. "I understand your concern, but we don't need an adult to look over our shoulder. We can handle ourselves just fine." "We never said you couldn't, but it still isn't right to just let you go off by yourselves," Thatch said while rubbing his ribs. "So you're just going to follow us around?" Luffy asked, now interested in the conversation. "Pretty much," Marco said. "Did you hear that, Sabo? They want to be part of my crew." Luffy jumped up and down excitedly, and Sabo silently questioned where he got that conclusion. "I don't think so, Luffy. I think they're just being overbearing." Sabo's sweat dropped. "But they're sailing with us, and that's like being on the same crew." Luffy's smile didn't falter. "We aren't joining your crew, kid," Thatch said. "Aw, why not? We're already part of a crew, but we're sailing together. Not under the same flag," Marco pointed out, and Luffy seemed to understand. "Oh, okay. But let me know if you change your mind," Luffy said, and Sabo raised an eyebrow. It wasn't like Luffy to just give up like that. He still pestered him and Ace to be a part of his crew even though they refused every time. Maybe it had something to do with the flag. No matter what pirate crew they met, Luffy always showed respect to their pirate flag, even Blue Jam's flag. Sabo guessed that had to be the case. "I just have one question, though," Sabo said, changing the subject. "If you only wanted to follow us from the beginning, then why did you keep your distance at first?" Sabo asked. He just couldn't see the logic of hiding your identity, and then revealing it in a short amount of time. "That was Thatch's idea. He thought you would be put at ease if you didn't recognize us." Marco pointed his thumb at his crewmate. "An unrecognizable ship in the distance that follows us for days on end is supposed to make us feel better?" Sabo asked. "Yeah, I know, I see the flaws now." Thatch rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Sabo internally debated whether they were telling the truth or not. Sure, their explanation made sense, but that could be a ruse to lower their guard. But then again, why would big-time pirates bother attacking 3 kids just starting their adventure? Not only that, but the evidence showed that they meant more good than harm. They saved a village, saved Luffy from drowning, and even helped cook a feast. Even now, they were proving themselves. They had every right to attack when Ace took the first swing, but all they did was dodge. Hell, they could still attack now with one of them out of commission, but they were just standing there, and explaining why they followed. Sabo decided they were telling the truth, but that didn't mean he had to like it. Alright, I believe you, but that doesn't mean I agree with you. We're just fine sailing on our own. We don't need you to look after us, Sabo said. Even so, we're still sailing with you, Marco said, and Sabo sighed. He knew Luffy would like the extra company, and he, himself was irritated but accepted it. It wasn't like they could beat Whitebeard commanders. His concern was Ace. Things would get loud once he woke up, and explaining the situation to him would be next to impossible. Even if he did bother to listen, he wouldn't believe him. Instead, he would go into overprotective brother mode, and insist that he be unchained to kick their asses. This was going to be a long week. XXXXXXXXX. Let me go, not until you've calmed down. They need a good ass kicking, no they don't. So do you, you traitor, traitor? What, I'll bash all of your skulls in. Would you just calm down and listen? Thatch silently watched the exchange between the two older brats from his ship. Ace had woken up around 5 minutes ago, and it hadn't been quiet since. He kept yelling and thrashing about, and wouldn't even listen to Sabo. He glanced over to Luffy, who was laughing at the argument. He couldn't help but think how well they would fit in on the Moby. Do you think he'll tire out? Marco asked. Hopefully, otherwise we won't be getting any sleep tonight, Thatch answered. Ace will be yelling all night, Luffy said as he stood on the railing. What makes you say that? Marco asked with a raised eyebrow. He's too angry to calm down. Don't worry, after a few days he'll get tired. Do you have any food? Luffy jumped down onto the deck. Are your brothers okay with you being over here? Thatch asked. They're too busy fighting to notice. Well, in that case, I don't mind whipping up something for you. What would you like? Thatch could never turn down a hungry face. Meat, Luffy yelled and threw his hands in the air. Thatch chuckled at the kid's enthusiasm, and walked into the kitchen. Luffy followed while Marco decided to continue to watch the fight. Thatch picked up a hearty chunk of meat from the fridge, and started to cook it. He knew it wouldn't be enough to satisfy the brats' appetite, but he needed to portion their food somehow. So, you're heading to Haruna Island, huh? Thatch asked, snapping Luffy out of his trance from watching the meat cook. Yup. That's what Sabo said, Luffy chirped. Did you know that island has a dojo on it? What's a dojo? A place they teach martial arts and swordsmanship, Thatch explained. Cool, I want to see the dojo. It's in Shimotsuki village. You can't miss it. I'll find my swordsman there, Luffy said with finality in his voice. You're seriously getting crew members this early? Thatch knew he asked him, Marco, and Pops to join, but he didn't think he was really looking for crew members already. Yeah, I already have my navigator, Sabo. Nope, Nami. Thatch was surprised at the answer. He assumed that Sabo was the unofficial navigator of their small crew. Isn't Sabo the navigator, though? He is, but he doesn't want to be a part of my crew. Luffy pouted some. But aren't you crew members? Thatch was more confused than ever. We are, but I'm not the captain. When I get old enough, I'll sail on my own, and I'll gather my own crew. Nami promised to wait for me. She's my navigator. Luffy explained, and Thatch finally understood. I get it. So you're just sailing with your brothers temporarily. You'll eventually start your own crew, Thatch clarified. Yup. Thatch finished cooking the meat, and handed it over to Luffy. It was gone within seconds. Thatch didn't know why he expected anything different. After all, he and his brothers proved to be bottomless pits at the last island. Why are you so determined to become captain of your own crew? The king of the pirates can't work under someone else. Luffy answered. Thatch had almost forgotten his obsession to be pirate. Do you want to be king of the pirates? I promised Shanks. Luffy's hand subconsciously touched his hat. So Marco wasn't kidding him when he said the brat knew Shanks. Can I have more? Luffy asked, handing the empty plate to Thatch. Sorry, but we have to ration our food. If we eat it all at once, we won't have anything to eat until the next island, Thatch explained. That's what Sabo said. Luffy pouted. Then Sabo is a bright kid. Come on. Let's see if the argument is close to finishing. Thatch put the plate away and gestured to the door. The two of them walked back out and met up with Marco. Sabo was also on the ship, and Ace kept yelling from his position on the small boat. Luffy, you shouldn't go onto their ship without me or Ace knowing. The poor kid sounded exhausted. Thatch didn't blame him for being so tired. He appeared to be the only rational one of their crew, and that had to be taxing on the small brat. But I was hungry, and Thatch gave me food, Luffy deadpanned. Don't accept their food either. We have our own, and we don't need to bother them. Sabo rubbed his temples. He appeared to be approaching his wit's end. But you wouldn't let me eat any, and I was hungry, Luffy pouted. We'll eat more tonight, now please come back to the boat. No, what did you say? I said no, Sabo is a meanie who won't share food. I want to stay with Thatchy. Luffy, I really don't want to put up with your stubbornness right now. Luffy stomped his foot and said, I'm staying, don't make me tie you up too. Sabo looked like he would go through with his threat, but Luffy was either oblivious or didn't care. Thatch guessed it was the former. Luffy made a face at Sabo, and that appeared to be the final straw. Sabo reached for a nearby rope, and ran after Luffy. The straw-hatted boy seemed to have finally gotten the picture and ran off. Thatch watched the kids run around on their deck, and realized that even a patient kid like Sabo had their breaking point. Thatch felt guilty for adding to the poor kid's stress. How did the brats manage to survive a week on their own? Marco asked standing next to Thatch. I really have no idea. You would think they would have killed each other by then. Thatch looked at the chaos those three managed to create. One brat tied up, and yelling obscene things, and the other two running around the deck and yelling at each other. Thatch had a feeling that things would only get weirder from here. XXXXXXXXX Marco placed his tea back into the hot water. It had been hours since Sabo caught Luffy, and now Luffy was tied up next to Ace. All three of them had been yelling at each other non-stop. It was amusing at first, but now it was annoying. Marco went inside when a headache started to make its presence known. Marco figured that taking a break wouldn't hurt, and Thatch promised to keep an eye on them just in case one of them snapped. Marco's thoughts drifted to the island they were going to land on the approximately 6 more days. He wondered if they would calm down before then. He had a feeling Sabo and Luffy would, but he had his doubts about Ace. The kid was hard-headed, and hated their guts right now. He wondered if Sabo would keep him tied up if they reached the island before he calmed down. Marco listened to the yelling outside, and he knew that none of them would be able to sleep that night. He sighed and resigned himself to a sleepless night. Thatch would probably doze off sometime after midnight. Marco envied Thatch's ability to sleep in the loudest conditions. But he guessed that one of them had to be up to keep the brats from killing each other, especially since one of them had the advantage of being untied at the moment. The noise from outside seemed to get louder, and Marco took a relaxing sip of his tea. He learned to relax in the loudest conditions from his time on the Moby. His brothers and sisters were a noisy bunch, and these kids hardly put a dent in the loudest meals he had to sit though. But damn it if they weren't trying. Marco couldn't help but think of how well they would fit into his weird, but fun family. He only hoped they would eventually accept. XXXXXXXXX Sabo stirred from his sleep. He gathered his groggy mind as much as he possibly could in his current state. He tried to figure out what had woken him. He kept his eyes shut to block out the light of the rising sun, and focused on his other senses. The waves were steady and peaceful. The breeze was gentle and refreshing, it was nice and quiet. Sabo jerked his eyes open and realized that it was indeed quiet. The only noise around was the flapping of the sails, the water hitting against the two boats, and the gentle snores for his brothers. This was the most peaceful it had been in days. The two idiots were still yelling by the time he fell asleep. He guessed they finally tired themselves out. His gaze wandered over to Luffy, who had his head in Ace's lap. He felt guilty for snapping and tying him up like he did. He lost his patience, and Luffy got a punishment he really didn't deserve. True, he wandered over to the neighboring ship and ate their food without informing him, but he should have handled it better. A lot happened that day and his patience wore thin. He carefully untied Luffy so he wouldn't wake him. He needed to make up for his behavior somehow. He glanced at the food rations they had, and felt a heavy weight inside his gut. He hated relying on others for help, but he really couldn't see a way out of it. He climbed up to the next ship, and walked into the kitchen. Thatch was in there preparing breakfast for him and Marco. "Morning, Brad. I bet you're glad to hear silence for once," he said over his shoulder. "Yeah, I am." Sabo shuffled his feet. He knew what he had to do to make things up to Luffy, but he had no idea how to go about it with Thatch. Thatch seemed to notice that Sabo had something on his mind, and waited for him to speak. After 3 minutes of silence, he finally decided to just wing it. I know this is rude of me to ask, but I was wondering how much food you have." Sabo looked at Thatch, who didn't seem fazed in the slightest. "We have enough to last all of us to the next island." "And by all of us you mean, you, me, Marco, Luffy, and Ace. Though, I doubt Ace would willingly accept my cooking again. Why do you ask?" "I need to make things up to Luffy, but the only thing I could think of was giving him the rest of our rations. But I didn't want to do so without knowing if you had enough to share or not." Sabo hated to put their next meal in the hands to these guys once more, but the best way to get to Luffy was through his stomach. He knew he would get an earful from Ace once he found out, but he really didn't care right now. "Ah, I see. Well, you don't need to worry. We have more than enough. Let the brat eat his fill, and I'll make an extra helping of pancakes for you both," Thatch said before moving the finished pancakes to a plate. "How do you know to make pancakes for Luffy too?" Sabo asked, bewildered. "Please, I've seen how he eats back on the last island. The feast was barely enough to saturate you three. I know the provisions you have left won't be near enough to fill his stomach." Sabo smiled softly before walking out. He hated that these guys decided to tag along without their permission, but right now, he was happy they were there. Now they had guaranteed meals, and extra guarding to keep Luffy from raiding their food. He was far from fully accepting their presence, but it was a start. XXXXXXXXX. "Wake up, Lou." Luffy was shaken awake. He opened his eyes and saw Sabo looking down at him with a small smile. Luffy was about to tell him good morning, but remembered that he was mad at Sabo. He frowned and turned his back to his blonde brother. "Luffy, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I'm sorry for my reaction yesterday. I was at my breaking point, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair, and I'm very sorry." Sabo sounded like he was really sorry. Luffy turned back around, looked at Sabo's face. He seemed to and Luffy instantly forgave him. "It's okay, Sabo. I forgive you." Luffy smiled brightly, and Sabo sighed in relief. "Thanks, Lou. And to make it up to you, you can eat the food we have on this boat." Luffy jerked into an upright position, and felt his mouth beginning to drool at the thought of eating. "Really? Yup, have it. Sabo gestured to the food, and Luffy didn't need a second encouragement. He dove toward the food, and started to tear into it. It was all pre-cooked, so he didn't need to worry about it being raw. But he would have eaten it raw if he had to. It was so good. 5 minutes went by, and the pile of food was no more. Luffy rubbed his belly in satisfaction. "Ah, that was tasty." Luffy had completely forgiven Sabo for being mean yesterday. "Glad you liked it. Now come on. Thatch is making pancakes." Sabo gestured toward the ship. "Yay! Pancakes." Luffy rocketed onto the ship, and burst through the kitchen door. Thatch jumped, and turned to Luffy. "Pancakes," demanded Luffy, and Thatch chuckled. "I had a feeling you would still be hungry. Here, these plates are for you and Sabo." Thatch placed 2 plates stacked high with pancakes on the table. Luffy jumped into the nearest chair, and began to devour the fluffy breakfast pastries. Sabo walked in, and joined him. Luffy was happy that Sabo was starting to get along with Thatch. He really liked Thatch. Thatch made good food, and was a good person. Maybe Ace would see that too once he woke up. Luffy didn't completely understand why Ace hated Thatch and the other guy. He guessed that Ace was being stupid, like he usually was. "So, what do you brats plan on doing on the next island?" Thatch asked as he ate his own pancakes. "I want to see the dojo," Luffy yelled. It sounded like a really cool place, and he just knew that he would find his swordsman there. He had a gut feeling about it. Thatch laughed at his enthusiasm. "Eager as always, I see," a voice said from the entrance. Luffy turned and saw Pineapple Head in the doorway. "Pineapple," Luffy waved, and Thatch laughed harder. "My name is Marco. Why can't you remember that?" Pineapple Head looked annoyed. "Because you're Pineapple Head, Luffy said. "Give it up, Marco. That kid will never call you by name." Thatch laughed. Pineapple sighed and grabbed his own plate. He sat next to Thatch and began to eat his meal. Luffy liked eating with these guys. The only thing that would make it better would be Ace. But Ace wasn't being nice right now. Luffy hoped Ace cheered up soon. Things just weren't the same without him. Ace glared ahead. He refused to even acknowledge the presence of the traitor who was trying to feed him pancakes. The pancakes they made. "Come on, Ace. You have to eat something," the traitor said, shoving the offending piece of food in his face. Ace turned away from the food. Well, as much as he could while chained to the mast of their small boat. He absolutely would not eat it. "Why is Ace not eating?" Luffy asked. Poor, innocent Luffy, who was being led astray by the traitor. "Because he's being stupid and overly stubborn like always. At least I'm not a." The traitor shoved a piece of pancake in Ace's mouth before he could finish the sentence. Ace glared at the traitor before spitting out the food in his face. "Damn it, Ace. Would you stop?" he yelled while wiping his face with a napkin. "Luffy, would you tell the traitor to take the rest of those pancakes and shove them up his ass?" Ace blatantly turned to Luffy, and ignored the traitor's frustrated groan. "Okay. But, who's the traitor?" "I'm not a traitor, Ace," the traitor yelled. "Did you hear something, Lu?" Ace asked in a mocking tone. "Yeah, Sabo talked to you, couldn't you hear him?" "Who's Sabo? He sounds like a dirty backstabber," Ace said, and Luffy looked alarmed. "Oh no. Ace lost his memory," Luffy yelled, and Ace could hear them laughing on the other boat. He would get them when he was free from his temporary prison. "Ace, do you remember me?" Luffy grabbed Ace's face and held it inches away from his own. "Let go of me, Luffy." Ace struggled to get his face out of Luffy's grasp. "Oh, good. Your memory is back." Luffy smiled. Ace would love nothing more than to punch the little idiot's head for being so stupid. "He didn't lose his memory, Luffy. He's just angry that I won't let him attack older and more skilled pirates," the traitor said. "Huh? There was that sound again. Did you hear it, Luffy?" Ace smirked when the traitor sighed in annoyance. "I don't have the patience for this. You feed him, Luffy." The traitor handed Luffy the plate of pancakes, and walked to the end of the boat. Luffy looked at the pancakes, then at Ace, then the pancakes again. Ace knew what he was thinking. "Don't eat them, Luffy. They were made by evil hands." "No, they weren't. Thatch made them, and Thatch isn't evil." "Yes, he is. I don't know what their plan is yet, but they must be up to no good." "Why's that?" Luffy asked and took a bite of pancake. "Luffy, spit that out. It's poison," Ace yelled. "But it's good," Luffy said around his bite. "I don't care. Spit it out now," Ace yelled, and Luffy swallowed. There was a silent pause. Ace couldn't believe Luffy would be so stupid. On second thought, yes he could. Luffy would eat anything in front of him. No. The fault lied on the traitor for leaving it in front of Luffy. Ace glared at the traitor who had his back turned. Luffy took another bite. "Stop eating it, Luffy." "But I'm hungry." Luffy took another bite. "You dumbass. They could be poisoned. But they aren't. Me and Sabo ate a bunch earlier, and we're still alive." Luffy took several more bites, completely stuffing his cheeks. "Sabo, you traitor!" Ace yelled at the traitor who turned at the sound of his name. "Luffy, those pancakes are for Ace." Sabo ran to stop Luffy, but it was too late. He already ate them all. Luffy sighed in satisfaction, and the traitor punched him in the head. "I should have known better than to leave a full plate of food in front of Luffy." The traitor pinched the bridge of his nose, and Ace kicked him in the shin, hard. "What the hell, Ace?" The traitor rubbed his aching shin. "That's for poisoning our little brother, you jackass," Ace growled. "The pancakes aren't poisoned," the traitor said through gritted teeth. "Yeah, you would say that. Traitor, would you stop calling me that? I'm not a traitor." "Then why did you take their side?" Ace nodded to the other ship to gesture who he was talking about. "I didn't. I only stopped you because attacking stronger, and much more skilled opponents is suicide. I don't care how strong they are. They crossed the line, and they need to be taught a lesson." "Okay, I agree that they crossed a line. They absolutely had no business following us, especially the way they did. But that doesn't mean we should attack them like you did. If they fought us seriously, we would all be dead. Can't you get that through your thick skull?" Ace fell silent. Okay, so maybe he had a point, but that didn't make him any less of a traitor. A true friend would back him up in the fight until one side was victorious. A true friend wouldn't chain him to a mast and feed their brother poisoned food, unless it really wasn't poisoned. Shut up, of course it was. Sabo was wrong and that was that. Whatever. Ace turned away to show that he was done with the conversation. Sabo sighed and said, "You're too stubborn for your own good sometimes." Sabo walked back to the end of the boat, leaving Luffy with him. Luffy looked at him and smiled. Ace just glared at the horizon. "Don't worry, Ace. They're good people. They won't hurt us." Luffy smiled and walked over to Sabo before Ace could say anything. Ace looked at the backs of his two brothers. Luffy was naive. He could be tricked so easily it wasn't even funny. He was also the weakest of the three. That's why he needed protecting the most. He could be overpowered and outsmarted in a heartbeat. He could understand him being tricked so easily. He just didn't understand Sabo. Sabo was easily the smartest of the three. He had a proper education from the years he was a noble. If they needed to plan something out, he was the one they went to. He was also the one with the most common sense. So why did he get tricked by these guys so easily? Ace just assumed that he switched sides all of a sudden. But the more he cooled down, the more he realized how unlikely that was. Ace shook his head. He was falling into their trap. They wanted him to let his guard down, and then they'd strike. Sabo was a traitor, and convinced unsuspecting Luffy to be on the opposing side. He couldn't let himself be fooled. Why should he even trust these guys? Because Luffy said they're good people. Sabo's words from the last island popped into his head. Back when they convinced him to accept a free meal. If you paid attention in the past, you would have noticed that Luffy is unusually perceptive of others. He can tell better than anyone else I've met who is good and who is bad, and Luffy seems to like these guys. Sabo's words rang in his head. Yeah, it was true that Luffy was good at reading people. He was better at it than anyone. Hell, he even tried to talk Ace out of accepting Blue Jam's offer, but he ignored him. Luffy may be easy to fool, but he always knew what people were really like just by looking at them. Ace glared at the two grown pirates who seemed to be discussing something. Ace didn't like these guys. Not in the slightest. If he had it his way, they would have been long gone. But, for some unknown reason, Luffy liked them. Luffy saw something in them Ace couldn't, and Sabo trusted that judgment wholeheartedly. What was he thinking? Luffy was an idiot, and Sabo was an even bigger idiot for believing him. These guys want to take advantage of stupid, naive kids. Ace wasn't going to let them harm his brothers in the slightest. Ace felt doubt prickle in the back of his mind as he tried to reassure himself that he was right, and the others were wrong. He just wasn't as confident about his conviction as he was an hour ago. He decided to watch these guys and see what they were really like. If they made even one wrong move, they were dead. He would personally see to it. XXXXXXXXX. Come on, Ace, eat something. Sabo practically begged Ace to eat, and Ace ignored him. He had been vigilantly watching the two Whitebeard pirates for several hours. They did nothing more than hang around the deck of their ship. The only exception would be Thatch going to prepare lunch. They decided to eat their meals outside to keep Ace company. Ace only saw this as eyed them further. He ignored everyone who tried to talk to him save for the grown pirates. And he was exceptionally cold when talking to them. He refused to eat their food, although it didn't seem to be poisoned. He wouldn't take that chance. You know, kid, starving yourself isn't going to make things better for you. If anything, you'd be more miserable because of your empty stomach. Thatch said from the table. They moved outside. Why do you care? Ace snapped at the guy. Because I don't like to see someone hungry, especially a kid. Yeah right, admit it, you're just trying to fatten us up so you can cook and eat us. Ace had been accusing them of various things every time they tried to talk to him. He wanted to figure out their plan, and this was the best he could do while tied up. Would you stop it with these dumb accusations, Ace? They don't want to eat us, Sabo yelled. And Ace ignored him. He only glared at Thatch, who looked disgusted at the thought of eating another human being. So they don't want to eat them. Or it could be an act to throw him off guard. Well, Ace wasn't going to fall for it. Would you cut it out? Sabo yelled and punched Ace on the side of his head. Ace tore his gaze from his targets to glare at Sabo. What was that for? Because you're being a moron. They don't want to eat us. They don't want to sell us. And they aren't aliens trying to kidnap us and take us to their mothership. Now, would you stop this dumb charade and eat already? Sabo held a fork full of mashed potatoes to his face. I'm not hungry, Ace said, and shifted his glare back toward the Whitebeard pirates. And I'm the king of Alabasta. Just eat, Sabo said with an eye roll. Ace said nothing. He just glared at the pirates. They did nothing more than look back at him while eating. The food did smell good, and he was absolutely starving. But he would rather starve to death than accept a crumb of food from these guys. His stomach growled in protest. See, you are hungry. Just swallow your damn pride and eat already. But Ace would choke if he swallowed his pride, Luffy yelled from the table on the other boat. This caused Sabo to chuckle, and Ace to glare at his youngest brother. Fair enough, Luffy. Sabo smiled. Luffy, you're dead once I get out of this thing. Look, Ace, even Luffy can see that you're being stubborn over nothing. Just eat the food. Sabo held the plate underneath Ace's nose so he could get a good whiff of the tasty smelling food. His mouth watered, and his stomach growled again. He hated how his body betrayed him so easily. No, Ace turned his head away, but Sabo shifted the plate under his nose again. He turned his head the other way, but Sabo moved the plate again. Ace kept moving his face, and Sabo kept moving the plate. Luffy suddenly stood from the table, catching everyone's attention. They all watched as he jumped off the railing, and landed on the boat. He plopped himself down next to Ace, and looked at him in the eye. Are you okay, Luffy? You didn't finish eating, Marco asked. I'm not gonna eat until Ace eats, he said while looking Ace dead in the eye. Everyone was silent. Ace couldn't believe what he was hearing. Luffy didn't want to eat. Bottomless pit, always hungry Luffy didn't want to eat. Ace didn't know how to respond. He just couldn't comprehend the words that came out of his mouth. No, Luffy. You need to eat. Go back to the table and finish your meal, Sabo said, and Ace never thought he'd hear anyone say that. No, Ace needs to eat too, and until he does, I'm not eating another bite. Luffy looked dead serious about his decision. Ace was just too stunned to react at all. All he could do was sit there with his mouth open. For crying out loud. Luffy ate Ace's breakfast this morning. Surely, he doesn't have the willpower to keep from eating food, right? See, Ace, now you got Luffy to stop eating. Just eat your meal, Sabo said more forcefully. And no, he's just bluffing. There's no way Luffy can resist food for too long, Ace said, snapping out of his stupor. I'm not taking that chance. You eat your food, now? Sabo tried to pry open Ace's mouth, but Ace held it shut tight. Ace wouldn't let them win. He wouldn't eat the food no matter what. He wasn't worried about Luffy. He was Luffy for God's sake. He would cave before sundown. XXXXXXXXX. It's been 2 days, and Luffy kept his promise. Everyone was flabbergasted to say the least, but none more so than Ace. Each time he thought Luffy would cave and eat something, he would surprise him and hold fast. They tried everything to get him to eat. They even went as far as to leave a plate of food right in front of him. But all he did was sit next to Ace and say nothing. Luffy was determined to keep his word. Ace heard Luffy's stomach give a loud growl, and he felt the guilt in his stomach get heavier. Here Luffy was starving, because Ace refused to free him. If he ate something, the Luffy would go back to the hungry little brother he came to know and love. But the thought of caving only made him angry. It was a matter of seeing whether his anger or his guilt would win in the end. Right now it was a tie, but guilt was quickly winning over. Ace absolutely hated it. Luffy's stomach growled again, and that was the final straw. Alright, Ace growled. Did you say something, Ace? Luffy asked. The poor kid sounded miserable. Alright, I'll eat something. Just please stop starving yourself, Luffy, Ace said a bit louder. Luffy shook his head. What do you mean, You said you would eat if I ate something. Yup. I won't eat my meal until you eat yours first, Luffy said, sounding happier at the thought of eating again. Is Ace finally going to eat something? Sabo asked from across the boat. Yup. Get Thatchy. We're going to eat lunch. Luffy jumped up and down. Sabo quickly climbed up to the ship and ran into the kitchen to let Thatch know, and Ace instantly regretted his decision. He was about to tell Luffy he changed his mind, when he saw that bright smile. That same smile that was missing for 2 whole days. Ace never thought he'd miss that smile, but he did. Ace swallowed his pride, and kept telling himself he was doing this for Luffy. It wasn't long before Sabo came back with a large plate full of food. The Whitebeard pirates came out to watch. Ace glared at them. All I'm doing is eating a plate of food. Do I really need an audience for that? Ace yelled. Yes. Everyone deadpanned, and Ace growled profanities under his breath which caused Luffy to laugh. You need to eat the whole plate, Sabo said before spearing a piece of beef and bringing it to Ace's face. No, I said I would eat, I didn't said I'd eat the whole plate, Ace argued. Ace eats the whole plate, or I won't eat anything, Luffy said, giving Ace a serious look. Ace hated it when Luffy got serious. It was so un-Luffy. Ace growled more profanities, and accepted the bite of food. His mouth instantly exploded with flavor. The meat was tender, and well seasoned. It practically melted in his mouth. Thatch apparently knew what he was doing when it came to food. He didn't show any of his delight, though. If anything, his glare deepened. Well, what do you think? Amazing, right? Thatch asked from the ship. Ace refused to let the guy know how much he actually liked his cooking. It's crap. He deadpanned. What did you say, brat? Thatch yelled and Marco grabbed him. I knew it. You were just looking for an excuse to ATTCKUS, Ace yelled, and Sabo hit him on the side of the head. He reacted that way because you insulted his cooking. Sabo speared another piece of meat, and shoved it in Ace's face. Ace glared at Sabo for half a minute before eating the next bite. The second bite was just as tasty as the first. And like the first time, he didn't let any positive emotions show. The rest of the meal was silent, with both Ace and Thatch fuming. Ace because they managed to get him to eat a whole plate of food, and Thatch because his cooking was insulted. Yay! Ace ate everything. Luffy cheered, and then rocketed other ship and knocked Thatch over. I'm hungry. Luffy all but shouted in his ear. Glad to see you're still as hungry as ever. Thatch patted Luffy's head, and Luffy smiled. Thatch and Luffy went into the kitchen, and Ace glared ahead. See, was that so hard? Sabo asked, and set the empty plate down. Ace didn't answer, but Sabo didn't seem to mind. He was just so angry with himself. How could he let Luffy manipulate him like that? Well, he ate a meal. That should satisfy Luffy. He wouldn't eat any more of their food. He still needed to figure out their plan, and the whole Luffy not eating thing threw him off focus. He stared at the ship. He would find out their motive. He staked his life on it. Now remember, no attacking the other pirates, Sabo said sternly. I heard you the first 100 time. Unchain me already, Ace yelled. Marco didn't really blame him. The poor kid had been promised to be let loose today, and Sabo spent the whole morning going over rules he had to follow. Most of them stated that he wasn't to attack him and Thatch. I'm just making sure you understand, Sabo said, finally unlocking the chains, and Ace was instantly working to free himself. It was finally done with Sabo's help, and Ace stood up for the first time in days. Ace stretched his arms upward, and arched his back. Marco heard his spine and shoulders give several loud pops. That wasn't surprising since he spent most of the week sitting in the same position. His muscles must have been so stiff. After his initial stretch, Ace did several smaller stretches to wake up his muscles and pop more joints. The reason for Ace's freedom was a large dot on the horizon in front of them. One look through the spyglass proved it to be the next island. The timing of it couldn't have been better. The three brats were quickly depleting their food stock. Ace was pretty much forced to eat due to Luffy threatening to go on another hunger strike each time he refused to eat. It became a daily occurrence for everyone to watch Sabo feed Ace his meal before eating their own meals. Something Ace absolutely hated, and he made sure to let everyone know exactly what he thought of it. Thatch learned to not ask Ace about his cooking after the third time he got insulted. Ace, what are you doing with that? Sabo's yell brought Marco out of his thoughts. He looked down and saw Ace glaring up at him. Thatch was in the kitchen making lunch, so he got to escape Ace's scrutiny. In his hand was one of the pipes they carried around. He didn't make any move to attack, nor did he seem like he would. He just stood there with that ever-present scowl. Didn't you hear me when I told you not to attack? Sabo stood in front of Ace. Relax. I'm only standing guard, Ace said, never once letting his eyes stray from Marco. Sabo stared at him for a few seconds before sighing in defeat. Fine, just don't jump off the deep end like you usually do, Sabo said and moved to the side. Ace just continued to stand guard. Sabu, when will we reach the island? Luffy whined from the front of the small boat. Calm down, Luffy. It'll be a while before we get there. Sabo reassured his fidgeting brother. We should reach it late tonight if we keep sailing, Marco said, and Luffy whined. But that's a long time from now. Luffy flopped onto his back and gazed at the clouds. We should get as close as we can before sundown and stop for the night. That way, we'll have all day tomorrow to explore the island, Sabo said, and Luffy groaned at the thought of waiting even longer before going on his next adventure. But I want to go there NOOOOOWWWW. Luffy rolled around on their small boat, and Sabo sighed in annoyance. Marco's heart went out to him. After all, he understood what it was like to be the only sensible one on a crew full of idiots. How about we play a game? Sabo suggested. No, I want to go to the island, Luffy demanded. Then how about we eat? It's almost lunchtime after all. Sabo appeared to be scraping the bottom of the barrel for a distraction. But Thatchy is still cooking, and he won't let me back in the kitchen after I ate all the ingredients for dinner last night. Luffy seemed even more depressed. Marco remembered that fiasco. Thatch was furious, and then Ace got furious at Thatch for yelling at his little brother. Then the two got into a shouting match. It took all of Marco's and Sabo's willpower to not beat their brother senseless. Everyone calmed down eventually, and Luffy was punished with no dinner, and was banned from the kitchen. Needless to say, tensions were high. I know you're bored, and want to explore the island, but the boat can only go so fast. I know you hate to hear this, but you have to be patient, Sabo said. Luffy groaned loudly, and Thatch walked out of the kitchen with Ace's plate. The brat's food is ready, Thatch said with little enthusiasm. Marco knew he was still trying to get over the fact that someone hated his cooking. It really hurt a chef's pride when their hard work gets insulted. All right. Time to eat, Ace, Sabo said, and climbed up the side of the ship to grab the plate. He climbed back down after fetching the food, and held it out to his brother. Ace made no movement to grab it. Ace, we've been over this. Luffy refuses to eat unless you do. You're no longer chained, so you can feed yourself now. Sabo sounded tired. We're close enough to the island. Luffy and I won't starve to death before we reach it, Ace stated calmly. Marco was surprised at how calm he was acting. He mostly knew Ace to be a violent hothead, who knew he could actually talk instead of yelling. Thatch worked hard to make this plate for you. Are you just going to waste it? Sabo asked. They can eat all they want, but I'm not eating any more of this crap. After all, isn't a chef supposed to make things taste good? Ace answered in the same calm manner. Marco sighed inwardly. Ace only traded his angry outburst for calm jabs at the chef's pride. What did you say, brat? Thatch yelled. I'm sorry, I should know better than to call you a chef. A chef knows how to cook a halfway decent meal. But Thatch is a good chef, Ace. His food tastes amazing. Luffy put his 2 cents into the conversation. See, your brother knows quality food when he tastes it, you just can't admit that I'm a good chef. Luffy? Knowing quality food? You could put a plate of dirt in front of him, and he'd think it was the best thing in the world. I wouldn't trust his judgment of food if I were you, Ace said. As much as I hate to admit it, Ace does have a point, for once. Luffy thinks all food is good. We once gave him some burnt cheese with dirty dishwater to wash it down, and he thought it was great, Sabo said, and Marco lost his appetite. No way. Did he get sick? Thatch went from annoyed to impressed in a matter of seconds. Why would I get sick? Luffy tilted his head to the side in confusion. Because it's nasty, Marco said, trying to keep the nausea out of his voice. No, it wasn't. It was great. Luffy defended the vomit-inducing combination, and Sabo gestured to Luffy as if to say, see? Okay, so you do have one point. But that doesn't mean I'm a crappy chef. Thatch went back to annoyed in a heartbeat, and Marco face-palmed. Sure, his ego was bruised some, but did he even realize that he was arguing with a bunch of kids? If you aren't a crappy chef, then why is your food crappy? Ace asked in fake innocence. My food isn't crappy. Thatch looked like he was about to pounce on the kid, so Marco grabbed him around the torso just in case he did try to attack. Yeah. Keep telling yourself that, Ace said, and casually picked his nose. Thatch was ready to jump when he stopped himself and took a deep breath. Did I really just let a 10-year-old antagonize me that much? He asked and pinched the bridge of his nose. Marco let go and said, yeah. I was concerned that you and Ace suddenly switched personalities or something. Nah, Ace just knows he'll get chained up if he loses his temper again, Luffy said and earned himself a bonk on the head. At least we'll be arriving on the island tomorrow, Sabo said. Yeah, that island is a godsend after the last week, Marco pointed out. You said it. Thatch agreed and went back into the kitchen. Are you sure you won't eat it, Ace? Sabo asked, holding the plate of food to his brother. Positive. We'll be able to hunt on this island, right? We'll catch our own food, so we won't have to rely on these guys anymore, Ace said, and Sabo shook his head. It looks like Thatch made this plate for nothing, Sabo said, and climbed back onto the ship. He handed the plate to Marco, and jumped back down to join his brothers. Marco looked at the full plate and was grateful that Thatch d meals until after Ace ate. Now the food wouldn't go to waste. He decided to eat it since the brats weren't going to, and Thatch can just cook his own. Marco looked at the island slowly getting bigger as they got closer. He and Thatch needed to restock their ship, so the brats had to go unsupervised for a while. He thought it was a good idea. They were obviously sick and tired of them hanging over their shoulder. They needed some breathing room, and Marco would let them have it. After all, how much trouble could they possibly get into in the East Blue? XXXXXXXXXX. The sun rose gently over the horizon. The sky was painted in beautiful pink and orange hues only to be perfectly reflected by the ocean. Not a cloud interrupted the beautiful rainbow that was the sky. What could possibly ruin such a peaceful and pleasant morning? Guys, wake up. It's morning. Let's go to the island now, Luffy yelled, interrupting Sabo's thoughts. Wah? Ace asked sleepily, only to be fully woken up by little rubber idiot bouncing on him. Get off me, Luffy, Ace yelled as he swung his pipe at Luffy. We have to get going. The island is right there. Luffy pointed to the fairly large island that was no more than 100 yards away. Alright, I'm unfurling the sail right now. Sabo laughed and untied the sail. It opened up and the boat picked up speed. Yay! Luffy cheered and ran to the front of the boat. Ace grumbled about annoying little brothers and rubbed his abdomen where Luffy jumped on him. Sabo smiled, and felt truly refreshed. After a week of stress from trying to keep Ace in check, Sabo felt like an island adventure was just what he needed. Although, he would be lying if he said he didn't hold any resentment toward the Whitebeard pirates. He could see where they were coming from, but his week would have been so much smoother had they not meddled. Which was why he felt his annoyance flare up when the ship started to move with them. Morning, brats. Excited to get to the island? Thatch asked, and Sabo tried his best not to look irritated. Ace, however, had no qualms showing his annoyance. Yeah, it's been so long since we've been on an island. Luffy turned to face Thatch better. Well, you three will get to be alone for a while after we dock. Marco and I need to restock our supplies, Thatch said, and Sabo felt his irritation melt away. After a week of being under needless adult supervision, they would be free. One look at Ace showed that he felt the same way. Once they were alone, and had eaten their fill, Sabo would come up with a plan to lose them. He didn't want another voyage like the one they just had. Luffy would whine, but it was a small price to pay to regain their privacy. Luffy mindlessly chattered to Thatch about all the things he wanted to do on the island, and Sabo tuned them out. He decided to study the island. There was a dock over to the right slightly. The dock led to a village, and in the center appeared to be a large dojo of sorts. He guessed that that was the famous Isshin dojo. He remembered reading up on dojos back when he was a noble. He found swordsmanship fascinating at the time. He had asked his father about sword lessons, and he turned him down immediately. Swordsmanship was for barbarians who barely knew how to use utensils, and he was born better than any barbarian. That's what he was told, and he didn't argue at the time despite how he felt about the statement. He really hated how stuck up those nobles were. Now, he had no interest in learning how to use a sword, but he figured it would be nice to check it out. His only concern was Luffy. He and Trouble were practically conjoined at the hip. No matter what precautions they took, no matter how many times they warned him, he always causes trouble in one way or another. He looked at his little brother happily chatting away about who know what. One could only hope that he didn't get into too much trouble. One could only hope. We're here. Luffy's yell pulled Sabo out of his thoughts. He looked at the island and realized that the docks were right in front of them. Sabo felt a smile spread across his face. Alright, Let's tie up the boat and start hunting, Sabo said as he tied the sail back up. Luffy looked ready to run off, but Ace grabbed him by the collar. Hold on. You got shot the last time you ran off to an island. This time we go together, Ace said and handed Luffy his pipe. There are animals to hunt here, right? Luffy asked Sabo as he jumped up and down excitedly. Yes, Luffy. The forests on this island are fairly large. We should have no trouble finding a meal or two, Sabo said and tied the boat to the dock. He grabbed his own pipe and nodded to Ace. Let's go catch us a proper meal, Ace said and Luffy and Sabo cheered. The three of them ran off. The Whitebeard pirates yelled something as they left, but Sabo ignored them. He was just happy to have solid ground under his feet again. The trio ran into the forest and immediately began their hunt. It wasn't long before Ace spotted bear tracks. The tracks led all around the forest until they spotted a large mound of brown fur in a small clearing. The three of them hid behind a bush. Sabo wasn't really impressed with the size of the bear. Sure, it was big, but the bears on Dawn Island were much bigger. Okay, Luffy, you be the distraction. Sabo and I will sneak up behind it and attack, Ace said quietly. Why do I have to be the bait? Luffy whined loudly. Ace and Sabo covered his mouth, but the damage had already been done. The bear turned to their direction and growled. Okay, Plan B attack. Ace yelled and charged out to the bear. Luffy and Sabo ran after him. The bear roared angrily and swatted at Ace. Ace dodged and ran up the bear's arm. He swung at the head, but the bear caught the pipe in his mouth. Hey, let go, you stupid bear. Ace struggled to get the pipe out of the bear's mouth. The bear raised its other arm to attack. Ace, Sabo yelled and hit the bear's elbow with the end of his pipe. The bear roared again and freed Ace's pipe in the process. Ace tumbled to the ground, but got back on his feet in an instant. The bear swatted at them, and they jumped back to avoid the large paw. Luffy ran forward and hit the bear on his shoulder. The bear backhanded Luffy into a tree. Luffy hit the tree, but was unfazed. That rubber power of his really did come in handy. I'm okay, Luffy said and brushed off some dirt. Ace growled and ran forward. The bear focused on Ace, so Sabo ran behind it. Sabo jumped on its back and hit the bear in the back of the head as hard as he could. The bear stood on its hind legs and roared loudly. Sabo jumped back as the bear swiveled around and attacked without going back to all fours. Now it was pissed. The bear tried to squish Sabo, but he ran to the side and barely avoided being hit. Sabo charged forward and struck a hard blow on the bear's side while it was getting up. The bear turned and swatted at Sabo. Sabo blocked the large paw with his pipe, but was pushed back several feet. Ace and Luffy ran from behind Sabo and jumped over him and stuck the bear in the face. The clearing was filled with a loud crunching sound, and the bear staggered back a bit. It fell to its haunches and shook its head, as if trying to clear its vision. Ace took the opportunity and gave one last blow to the back of its head. There was another crunching sound, and the bear fell forward. It didn't move again. We did it, Luffy cheered. Yes, you did, said an unknown voice. Ace ran to his brother's side and glared at the newcomer. He was a kid, somewhere between the ages of Ace and Luffy. He had a head of green hair, and he carried 2 wooden swords and 1 real sword on his hip. He seemed impressed that the 3 of them took on a bear all by themselves. Is that a real sword? Luffy asked in excitement. Yes, it is, the kid answered, and Luffy had stars in his eyes. So you're from the dojo, Luffy said and practically vibrated in his enthusiasm. Yeah, awesome. Will you join my crew? Luffy asked, and smacked him upside the head. Would you stop asking random people to join your crew? It's bad enough you convinced that orange-haired witch to join you, Ace yelled. Nami isn't a witch, she's my navigator, Luffy yelled right back. So, why are you here, kid? Sabo asked, and the kid looked annoyed. I'm not a kid. My name is Zoro, and I want to challenge you to a duel, Zoro said. A duel, huh? Ace said, and cracked his knuckles in anticipation. Sabo shook his head at Ace's eagerness to get into a fight with practically everyone they met. Why do you want to duel us? Sabo asked. You're obviously strong. I want to test my swordsman skills against worthy opponents. If you can take down a bear by yourselves, you can take me on. Zoro smirked, and Ace smirked right back. "Alright, but don't cry home to your mom when you lose," Ace said, and grabbed his pipe. "I don't lose," Zoro said, and unsheathed the real sword. He placed it in his mouth of all things, after making sure the back of the blade was facing them. It was only a spar after all, and grabbed the other two. He had a wooden sword in each hand, and all three of them looked at him weirdly. "What are you doing?" Ace finally asked. "I use Santoryu, the three-sword style," Zoro explained. His words were somewhat muffled by the sword in his mouth. "You look ridiculous." Ace deadpanned. "No he doesn't, he looks awesome," Luffy defended. "Yes, Luffy, he does. Who in their right mind would?" Ace was cut off when Zoro suddenly attacked. Ace managed to dodge one sword and block another, but he was hit by the third. "Shut up, and let our fight do the talking," Zoro said, and Ace rubbed the shoulder that got hit. Ace smirked and got into a fighting position. "Fine, have it your way," Ace said, and the two had a stare down. Despite how weird Zoro looked, he was obviously skilled and powerful. Ace was also pretty skilled, and could probably take this kid on all by himself. Sabo sighed and sat on the sidelines with Luffy. The two sides launched at each other. Zoro attacked mercilessly, and Ace was able to block most of the hits. They were at a stalemate for a good minute before they both realized they weren't getting anywhere like that. Zoro jumped back, and Ace rushed forward with his own attack. Zoro blocked it, but was pushed against a tree. Ace ran forward and attacked again, but Zoro ducked just in time. The force of the blow caused the tree to topple over. "Are you sparring him, or trying to kill him?" Sabo yelled. Ace turned to respond to Sabo's question, but Zoro used Ace's distraction to his advantage. Zoro got a few good hits in, before Ace forced him back. Zoro stood a good distance away from Ace, and they stared down each other. Zoro gave a vicious smirk. "You're tougher than I thought. It looks like I finally get to test out my new move," Zoro said with a smirk. "New move?" Ace questioned dryly. Sabo face palmed. From the tone of Ace's voice, it was obvious that he was underestimating Zoro. Sure he could beat Zoro, but not if he misjudged the strength of the young swordsman. "I've been looking for a worthy opponent to test it out on," Zoro said, and crossed his arms. The sword in his mouth crossed the sword on the right, and the real blade was behind the wooden blade. Ace looked unimpressed. Three-sword style. "Oni," Zoro rushed forward so fast that Sabo barely even saw him. The wooden swords knocked the pipe out of Ace's hands, and the back of the real blade hit him with such force that he landed on his back. "Jiri," Zoro finished. Ace laid on his back with a stunned look on his face, and Sabo shook his head. He wasn't really surprised by this outcome. Zoro pointed the tip of one of his wooden swords at Ace. "Checkmate," Zoro said in a victorious tone. Ace growled, and kicked the wooden sword out of Zoro's hand. Zoro's eyes widened in surprise, as Ace caught it in midair. Ace immediately swung at Zoro, who blocked it with the other wooden sword. Ace got to his feet, and Zoro grabbed the sword out of his mouth to fight with two swords. He wasn't as powerful with two blades, but Sabo could tell he had more practice with two blades than he did with three. The two swung at each other viciously. Each swing was more powerful than the last. Finally they met the two wooden swords with such force that they splintered and broke. They stared at the broken swords for a few seconds before tossing them aside. "Ace, catch!" Sabo threw Ace his pipe. Ace caught it, and the two continued to fight. Zoro was nowhere near as skilled with one blade as he was with two. Ace quickly got the upper hand, and managed to knock the sword out of Zoro's hand. The sword landed pretty far away with the tip of the blade shoved in the ground. Ace swung at Zoro, who dodged it, and started to run for his sword. Ace ran forward, and attempted to catch up to Zoro when he suddenly stopped with a pained look on his face. "What's wrong, Ace?" Sabo called out, genuinely concerned that something was wrong. "Cramp!" Ace yelled and toppled over, and Sabo sighed in annoyed relief. Ace had been sitting in one position for several days. It was only logical that his muscles would cry out in protest to being suddenly used so violently. Zoro grabbed his sword, and gave Ace an unreadable expression. "You're in no condition to keep fighting. We'll have a rematch tomorrow. Same time, same place," Zoro said and walked off. "Come back here, you bastard, I'm not done yet." Ace tried to get up, but he cried out in pain and fell back over. "Give it up, Ace. Zoro's right, you can't fight like this." Sabo sat next to Ace. "Whose side are you on? I can't let this fight just end, I have to finish it." Ace started to crawl forward. Sabo stopped him and said, "The only way this fight can continue is if you get rid of those cramps." "Not until I win, Ace, he's already gone. You'll get a chance to fight him tomorrow." Ace didn't say anything. He just glared at the spot where Zoro disappeared. Sabo rolled his eyes at Ace's stubbornness. "Come on Luffy, let's." "Luffy?" Sabo asked, and looked around the clearing. Luffy was nowhere to be seen. "Damn it, not again!" Ace yelled once he realized the rubber idiot was missing again. "He probably followed Zoro. He didn't want him to join his crew after all," Sabo said. "He said he came from the dojo, didn't he?" "Yeah, they're probably on their way over right now. When I find him, I'll kick his rubber ass from here to the moon," Ace said, and started to get up. "You stay here. I'll go get him," Sabo said, but Ace got to his feet and gave Sabo a challenging look. "Fine, you can come. Just hurry." Sabo relented and the two headed toward the village. "That was awesome. Will you stop following me? Hey, join my crew?" "No, why not? Because I said so." "That's not a good enough reason." "I don't care," Zoro yelled over his shoulder and Luffy pouted. Luffy had followed Zoro in the hopes of getting him to join his crew, but Zoro didn't want to join. Luffy had already decided that Zoro was going to be his swordsman, though, and he would make sure that happened. Even if he had to follow the guy around until he agreed. They walked in an uncomfortable silence. Luffy was never more than 10 steps behind Zoro. They walked until they came across a small clearing with a dead bear in the middle. "Weren't we just here?" Luffy asked. The bear in the middle looked like the bear he and his brothers killed. "That's weird. The village is supposed to be here. Don't tell me it moved again," Zoro said to himself. "Whoa, the village moves?" Luffy asked excitedly. He had never been to an island where villages moved around. This was a cool island. "Yeah, things move around a lot on this island. Trees, boulders, caves, the village," Zoro listed with his fingers. "That's so cool. Can clearings move too?" Luffy looked around in awe. "Yeah, like everything else, clearings move. It makes things confusing, but I eventually find my way back," Zoro said, and walked in a random direction. Luffy followed close behind. "Awesome. I've never been on an island like this. How often do things move?" Luffy wanted to know as much about this place as possible. "Things move around all the time," Zoro said as they entered a small clearing with a dead bear in the center. "Hey, another clearing with a dead bear," Luffy pointed out. "No, it's the same place. It just moved again." Zoro sounded more frustrated than before, and walked off in another direction. They walked a little ways. Luffy looked around to see if any of the trees would move while he was looking at them. They didn't, but they looked familiar somehow. Luffy tried to think of why they were familiar, but was distracted when they entered a small clearing with a dead bear in the center. "I don't believe it, the clearing moved again," Luffy yelled. "How did it keep moving without them noticing?" "I hate it when it does this," Zoro said, and ran in another direction. Luffy ran after him. He looked harder to see if anything moved. Nothing moved, but everything looked familiar again. Luffy nearly bumped into Zoro, who stopped suddenly when they entered a small clearing with a dead bear in the middle. Zoro grunted in frustration, and ran in another direction. Luffy chased after him. "This is going to take a while, isn't it?" Luffy asked. Zoro's lack of response was all the answer he needed. XXXXXXXXX. "What is this place?" Ace asked as he stretched his arm muscles again. He still had cramps, but they weren't as bad as they were earlier. He and Sabo were in a fairly large clearing just inside the forest. All around the clearing were broken training dummies, and broken wooden swords. It looked like someone went crazy tearing everything up, and then left in a hurry. "It looks like some sort of training area. Maybe the students at the dojo use it," Sabo suggested, and inspected a nearby headless training dummy. "They need new equipment if that's true," Ace said and kicked the remains of a wooden sword. "Hey, look at this," Sabo gestured for Ace to stand next to him. Ace walked over. Sabo stood in front of a path that, more than likely, went to the village. But Sabo wasn't pointing to the path, instead he was pointing to a bright red ribbon that was tied to a tree. The ribbon was around their eye level, and practically glowed in the sunlight. "Why is there a ribbon here?" Ace asked. "I don't know, but there's another one further down the path," Sabo said. Ace looked down the path, and sure enough, there was another ribbon tied to another tree in the same fashion as the first. It was just as red, and just as eye-catching as the first. "Why are there ribbons tied to these trees?" Sabo asked as he scratched his head in confusion. "Maybe they're decorations," Ace asked. "Maybe, hey, there's another one over there," Sabo pointed to said ribbon. "Okay, this is freaky," Ace said and walked up to the third ribbon. "And another ribbon." Sabo ran to the fourth, which was where the forest ended. The entrance to the village was about 10 feet from where they stood. "Hey, there are 2 ribbons at the entrance," Ace pointed out. On either side of the gate that led to the village were the same bright red ribbons they found in the forest. Just like the other 4, they were at their eye level. "I think they lead somewhere," Sabo said. "Only one way to find out," Ace said and walked through the gate. Sabo followed right behind him. "But what about Luffy?" Sabo asked. "He probably followed the ribbons too. They're hard to not notice, and they're his favorite color. Do you think he'd ignore them?" Ace turned to Sabo. "Good point," Sabo said. They wordlessly followed the ribbons throughout the village. They were on buildings, posts, and food stands. All of them were the same bright red color, and all of them were at their eye level. They made a path to the center of the village. The trail ended at the gates of the Ishin dojo. The gates were covered in the ribbons, which made it very hard to ignore. "They lead here. But why?" Sabo asked. "Who cares? We were trying to get here anyways, right? This just made our job easier," Ace said, and walked in. "Ace, you can't just walk in without being invited first," Sabo fussed from the outside. "Hey, we need to find Luffy, and this is the most likely place he'd be. So you can stand out there waiting to be invited. But I'm going to find our little brother," Ace said, and started walking. He walked a few feet before he heard Sabo's footsteps approach from behind. "I hate it when you're right," Sabo said flatly. "This place is pretty big. He could be anywhere," Ace said as he looked around. "Let's split up. We'll cover more ground, and find Luffy faster," Sabo said. "Good idea. I'll take the main building. You take the courtyard. We'll meet back at the gate once we're done looking," Ace said, and Sabo nodded in understanding. Ace ran up to the building, and walked in. There was no one inside the room, so Ace looked in another room. It too was empty. "Luffy, get your ass out here now," Ace called out. There was no response. Ace growled, and ran into another room. It was also empty. Ace ran around looking in every room he came across, all the while calling out for his idiotic brother. He eventually came to a room with an old man in it. He sat with his legs under him, and he was sipping tea from a cup. He wore a pair of glasses, and had his hair pulled back into a ponytail. "I was wondering when you'd get to this room," the old guy said, and looked at Ace. "Who are you, and what did you do with my brother?" Ace yelled, and tightened his grip around his pipe. He ignored the cramp in his forearm starting to flare up again. If this guy did anything to Luffy, there would be nothing to stop him from beating this guy's brains out. "My name is Koshiro. As for your brother, I never even met him," he said, and took another sip of his tea. Ace felt anger rise in his chest. "You liar. He's somewhere in this room," Ace yelled, and started looking around. "Feel free to look anywhere you wish, but I have never even seen your brother," Koshiro said. "Yeah right. Cut the act, old man. He followed one of your students here." Ace's annoyance grew with each second he was stuck with this geezer. The old man sighed and asked, "Did this student of mine have green hair, and carry 3 swords?" "What difference does it make if he did?" Ace asked. "You met him in the forest didn't you?" Koshiro asked, and Ace inwardly freaked out. Just who was this old cook? Was he psychic or something? "How do you know?" Ace asked in a mixture of anger and panic. "If your brother followed Zoro, they're more than likely still in the forest." Koshiro set his tea down, and stood up. Ace held his pipe Yupian. Ace didn't trust this guy for anything, and he freaked him out. Not that Ace would ever admit that. "Zoro has the worst sense of direction of anyone I have ever met, student or otherwise. I led him to the training area just inside the forest to train. On the way there I tied several red ribbons on various landmarks around his eye level, and made sure he saw where they were. This way he could find his way back easier. That was a few days ago. The fact that he hasn't returned yet can only mean that he still managed to get lost. Koshiro finished with a patient sigh. Ace's sweat dropped at the thought of someone have worse directional skills than Luffy. Do you really think I'm stupid enough to believe that someone is worse at navigation than Luffy? Ace demanded. Koshiro didn't answer. He only smiled and walked toward the door. Hey, where do you think you're going? Ace yelled. To save your brother from my directionally challenged student, he said, and Ace felt his guard go up significantly. Why should I believe you? You could be luring me into a trap for all I know. Ace held his pipe in a threatening position. You can look around here if you want, but the chances of finding him here are little to none, Koshiro said, and walked out of the room. Ace stood there. The old geezer just gave him permission to look around, but that could be a trap. He could always follow him, but that could also be a trap. What if Luffy really was lost in the forest? If Zoro was really as bad as the old man said, then it was a case of the blind leading the blind. They didn't stand a chance of finding their way out. If that was true, then that means he and Sabo just abandoned Luffy in the forest with the only person who was dumber than he was. But Luffy could also be stuck here somewhere, and the old man just wanted to lead him away from his baby brother. What if Luffy did make it back, and the old guy tied him up somewhere? What if he was going outside to do the same to Sabo? In a fit of protectiveness, Ace dashed out of the room and fell over when his calves cramped up again. He growled in anger and pain. His brothers were in trouble, and he couldn't even move. Ace, Sabo called as he walked into the building. Over here, Sabo, Ace yelled and tried to stand up. Who was that guy that walked out? He said he was going to find Luffy, Sabo asked. He's Luffy's kidnapper, Ace yelled and managed to stand. Wait, what? Sabo asked bewildered. He has Luffy tied up here somewhere, Ace said and tried to walk off the cramps. What makes you say that? Sabo asked. He said that Zoro Kid had worse directions than Luffy, Ace said. But Luffy has the worst navigation of anyone I've ever met, Sabo said. Exactly, he even said that the ribbons were meant to lead Zoro back here, Ace said, and looked in a room he hadn't checked yet. Sabo had a thoughtful look on his face. Wait, Ace. Let's really think about this, Sabo said, and Ace felt annoyed by the blonde. What's there to think about? He was lying, and Luffy is tied up around here somewhere. We just have to find him, and kick that guy's ass for messing with our brother. Ace checked another room, but grunted in frustration when it too was empty. But what if he isn't lying? Sabo asked, and Ace turned to look at Sabo. And what if he is? Ace challenged. I'm just saying that we need to look at this logically. It's true that he could be lying, but he could also be telling the truth. We need to think of strategies for both possibilities, Sabo said, and Ace calmed down some. At least Sabo admitted that Luffy could be around here somewhere. Fine. The strategy is, find Luffy, and kick that guy's ass, Ace said. Checked another empty room. How about one of us follows that guy, while another one stays here to look for Luffy? Sabo suggested, and Ace paused in his search. No way. Why not? It could be an ambush, Ace said and resumed his search. What if we stayed in the shadows so he doesn't see us? Sabo suggested. Yeah, and it'll work as well as it did with the old geezer, Ace said as he walked up a set of stairs. He winced at some cramps that refused to go away. You can't compare Garp to everyone. Garp is a Marine. He had special training, Sabo said. Not to mention that he's crazy, Ace deadpanned. Exactly. Look, if it's true that Luffy is out in the forest, and we're here, then who will stop that guy from attacking him? Sabo asked, and Ace stopped. He hadn't thought of that. Worry prickled at his mind, as he thought of that creep attacking his practically defenseless brother. He turned to Sabo, and saw the same worry reflected in his eyes. Fine. But if anyone is following that old guy, it's me, Ace said, and started for the door. He was stopped by Sabo. Your muscles are still spazzing out. Out of the three of us, I'm the only one that could possibly take that guy on, Sabo said, and Ace tried to mask the pain of another crab flaring up. I'm not letting you go alone, then, Ace said, and Sabo shook his head. You couldn't even finish Zoro off earlier. You'd be better off looking for Luffy here, and between me and Luffy, I stand a better chance of fighting him, Sabo said. And Ace felt angry and helpless. If it weren't for the cramps, he would have left Sabo here a long time ago. He hated it when he couldn't help his brothers. He would have argued further, but Luffy's life was in danger. Fine. But you better get back here in one piece. Ace relented, and looked in a nearby room. Sabo nodded before he ran back down the stairs to follow that Koshiro guy. If Sabo and Luffy didn't return unscathed, then Ace couldn't be held accountable for his actions. XXXXXXXXX, is it just me, or is the food on this island pricey? Thatch asked, as he carried a large portion of food on his back. It only seems pricey because we're buying enough to feed an army. Marco answered, also carrying a large portion of food. It isn't my fault. Those brats eat more than anyone I've ever seen, Thatch argued. I'm not saying it is, but do we really need this much? The kids will more than likely bring their own chunk of food. Better to have it, and not need it. Thatch shrugged, and Marco rolled his eyes. They walked a few feet before Marco spotted movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned and saw Sabo somewhat hidden behind a corner, and appeared to be looking for someone. He could sense apprehension and indecisiveness rolling off of the brat. Marco raised an eyebrow at this. Sabo was easily the most sensible one out of the small trio. It was odd to see him acting like this. Not only that, but the brat was alone. He began to feel concern for the two missing brothers. Did something happen to them already? They were only gone for little over an hour? Marco stopped and gestured over to Sabo. Thatch nodded, and they walked over to the blonde, who spotted them quickly. How's it going, brat? Thatch asked when they approached. It's, going okay. Look, I'm kinda in a hurry, so I'll see you later. Sabo quickly said, and ran off. Marco and Thatch watched the small pirate disappear into the crowd. Something was definitely up if Sabo was acting that strange. The missing two didn't help matters, either. Hey, Thatch, can you? Yeah, I can carry both loads. You follow them to see how much trouble they're in. Thatch said, and took Marco's load. Thatch struggled under the extra weight for a few seconds before steadying himself. Marco nodded his thanks, and trailed after the kid, who was heading for the forest. Marco hoped that they didn't get themselves into too much trouble. XXXXXXXXXX Sabo ducked behind a tree. The dojo guy hadn't noticed his presence so far, which Sabo was eternally grateful for. He had a few close calls, though. He didn't want to fight the guy, but if he had to, then he had to. Sabo got the feeling that he didn't need to worry about this guy, however. He seemed like a calm, reasonable man. Maybe Ace was jumping to conclusions again. He knew better than to listen to the delusions Ace would dream up about people's chances with Luffy missing. If this guy was dangerous, and Sabo didn't listen, then it would be like killing Luffy himself. He could never live with himself if that were to happen. A part of him wished that he had told Marco and Thatch what was happening. They could be a big help if he ended up needing to fight this guy, but this was their battle. He knew he shouldn't rely on anyone other than his brothers to solve their problems. The Whitebeard pirates were no exception. Sabo dashed to another tree when the old guy got far enough. This had been a repeating pattern for a long time now. He wondered how far they'd go before the dojo guy noticed someone was following him. His thoughts were interrupted by the smell of something cooking. Sabo briefly wondered what it could be before he remembered the bear he and his brothers killed. He felt a small pang of anger at whoever was cooking it. The guy walked into the small clearing where the bear was being cooked, and Sabo stayed in the shadows. Luffy and Zoro had made a fire, and were cooking the bear. Sabo was upset that Luffy would eat the bear without him and Ace, but he also knew Luffy could barely contain himself when it came to his stomach. There you are. I've been looking all over the forest for you, the guy said, successfully capturing their attention. Master Koshiro, Zoro said, and Luffy looked up in excitement. This is you, Master? Luffy asked while bouncing. Yeah, Zoro answered. Awesome. Hey, tell Zoro he has to join my crew, Luffy said, and Sabo resisted the urge to punch him in his rubbery head. Will you cut that crap out? I already told you, I'm not joining, Zoro yelled, and Luffy pouted. But I already decided that you would, so you have to, Luffy said. I'm not going to be your swordsman. Of course you aren't. You're going to be my swordsman and first mate, Luffy said with a big grin. You can't just decide that, Zoro yelled, and Sabo felt bad for him. Once Luffy got you in his sights, he refused to give you up, Hell, he followed Ace every day until he finally caught up to them, and now he was their little brother. That just showed that Luffy usually got what he wanted. Which meant that Luffy would more than likely get Zoro to join his crew. He didn't know how, but Luffy would find a way. She. Luffy laughed, and Zoro fumed. You must be Luffy, Koshiro said, and Luffy turned to him. Yup. How do you know my name, old man? Luffy asked while picking his nose. One of your brothers burst into my dojo looking for you, and the other one followed me here. Koshiro looked directly at Sabo, and he jerked back in surprise. This guy knew Sabo was following him. How did he know? Why didn't he attack if he was being led to an ambush? Sabo gulped loudly, and cautiously stepped out into the clearing. He remained in a defensive position as he slowly made his way to Luffy. Hi, Sabo. Isn't this island cool? Luffy asked, and ran up to Sabo. Stay behind me, Luffy, Sabo said, never once taking his eyes off of Koshiro. You don't have to be afraid of me. I don't intend to harm you or your brothers. And if I did, I think your friend would have something to say about that, Koshiro said, and Sabo wondered what he meant by that. So, you could sense me too, Marco said as he stepped into the clearing. Sabo gaped at the man with the unfortunate shaped head. He wasn't really shocked that Marco had followed. No, what shocked him was that Sabo had no idea Marco was even there. Yet, this dojo master could not only sense that he was being followed, but also that his follower was being followed as well. Hi, Pineapple Head, Luffy chirped from his spot behind Sabo, and he heard Zoro snort at the nickname. My name is Marco, he said almost sadly. I hope you don't mind me asking why a white-beard pirate is in the East Blue, Koshiro asked. We're just here to keep an eye on these brats, Marco said, turning toward the only other adult in the area. Thatch is here too, Luffy said, interrupting the conversation. Yes, he is. What I'm worried about is their missing brother, Marco said, gesturing to Sabo and Luffy. You mean Ace? Sabo asked. The third one is probably at the dojo, still, Koshiro answered. No fair, he got to see the dojo without me, Luffy whined. That wouldn't have happened if you didn't run off again, Sabo yelled, and bonked Luffy on the head. He seriously wondered how his noisy brother always managed to slip away without them noticing. But I had to get Zoro to join my crew, Luffy pouted. How many times do I have to tell you, I'm not joining your dumb crew, Zoro yelled, and Luffy grinned at him. I already made up my mind. Luffy laughed and Zoro looked ready to bash his skull in. Sabo made sure he was in between the two. Come on, Luffy. We'd better go get Ace before he destroys the dojo looking for you, Sabo encouraged. But how are we going to get around if things on the island keep moving? Luffy asked, and Sabo looked at him confusedly. What are you talking about, Lu? He asked. Zoro tried to lead us out of the forest, but this clearing kept moving back in front of us, Luffy explained, and Sabo was more confused than before. Things move around on this island, which makes it hard to move around, Zoro said, and Sabo honestly had nothing to say. Koshiro sighed and said, Forgive my student, he gets lost easily. No, I don't. This island keeps moving around. That's why it's hard to remember where the village is, Zoro yelled. Zoro, I left a trail of bright red ribbons that led back to the dojo. How did you not see them? Koshiro asked tiredly. You must have misplaced the ribbons or something. I didn't see them, Zoro said, and Koshiro gave a defeated sigh. Let's just go back to the dojo, Koshiro said while rubbing his temples. Can we eat the bear first? I'm hungry, Luffy asked, and his stomach growled in agreement. Fine, but we better save some for Ace. Sabo relented, and sat down next to the cooking bear. Yay, I'm starving, Luffy cheered. The bear still had some time left to cook. So Sabo and Luffy sat there while Marco, Koshiro, and Zoro headed back toward the village. Luffy started to chat endlessly about his and Zoro's misadventure of making constant loops back to the small clearing. Sabo listened, and shook his head in disbelief. He didn't think it was possible for someone to be worse at navigation than Luffy. If Zoro did end up joining Luffy's crew, then Nami had better be the world's greatest navigator to make up for their poor directional skills. Marco walked alongside the master of the Ishin dojo and his student. He was amazed that someone was so directionally incompetent that they thought the island moved. He shook his head slightly. The kid had better not sail off to sea, otherwise he'd never find this island again. I can see why the Whitebeard pirates are interested in those 3 kids, Koshiro said, catching Marco's attention. You do? Marco raised an eyebrow. They're young, but they have amazing potential. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with when they grow up, he said, and Marco nodded in agreement. What? Even that annoying one with the straw hat? The green-haired kid asked in outrage. Especially the annoying one with the straw hat. He may be weak now, but give him a few years and he'll start catching up to you in strength, Koshiro explained. Okay, the other 2, I can see. But, really? That guy? He asked in bewilderment. Yes, that guy. He's already stronger than most kids, but is very weak when compared to you and his 2 brothers, Marco explained. I don't believe you. There's no way a weakling like that can ever become strong, he said and crossed his arms in defiance. Koshiro stopped, and faced his pupil with an unreadable expression. Zoro, your dream is to become the world's greatest swordsman, is that correct? He asked. Well, yeah, but what does this have to do with? Do you think you can fulfill that dream right now? Koshiro asked, and Zoro looked confused. What? Do you think you can beat the current greatest swordsman as you are now? He asked again. Of course not, I still need to get stronger, Zoro answered. So you'd say you were too weak? Yeah, and that all you need is time to become stronger? Duh. That's how training works. So why is this true for you, and not Luffy? Koshiro asked, and Zoro opened his mouth to answer. He left it open for a few seconds before closing it. He got a thoughtful look on his face as he tried to think of a reason why Luffy would always be weak. It's true that he's small and weak now, but he will become strong in due time. Just like you or anyone else who puts forth time to train, Koshiro said, and turned back to the village. They walked in silence as Zoro appeared to be lost in thought. Marco kept a close eye on him just in case he strayed off, and got lost again. He did try to veer off a few times, and Marco quickly corrected him. How is it even possible to get lost in a straight line? I wonder how the freckled one will react to us returning without his brothers, Koshiro asked, breaking the silence. He's not going to be happy, that's for sure. Marco was not looking forward to Ace's short temper. Did that kid ever have a reasonable reaction to anything? Are you talking about that freckled kid that hangs around those others we left in the forest? Zoro asked. Yeah, Marco answered. He's already at the dojo? Zoro raised an eyebrow. That's where I last saw him, Koshiro said as they entered the village. Zoro smirked and said, he must be eager for our rematch if he's already there. Actually, he was looking for his brother, Koshiro said, and Zoro lost his smirk. HMPH, we're still having our rematch whether he likes it or not, Zoro said and turned left when Koshiro and Marco turned right. This way, Zoro, Koshiro said patiently. I knew that, Zoro yelled and went back to following them. Marco shook his head in disbelief, and continued onward. His thoughts trailed back to Ace. He hoped the brat didn't severely overreact again. But, knowing Ace, he definitely would. XXXXXXXXX Ace stayed in the shadows of the courtyard. Luffy was nowhere to be seen, which meant that he was in the forest. That also meant that Sabo had walked into a trap. He berated himself for letting not one, but both of his brothers down. The only thing he could do was lie in wait for that Koshiro guy to show up. He would get answers one way or another. He stretched properly to prepare for the inevitable battle. His cramps were mostly gone, and he didn't need them to flare up again when he fought the dojo master. He would personally see to it that that guy would pay for messing with his brothers. He tensed when the gates opened. He got into an attack position, but froze when he saw Marco walk through. He was followed by Koshiro and Zoro. Ace couldn't believe what he was seeing. Oh wait, yes he could. He knew Marco and Thatch weren't to be trusted. He tried to warn Sabo and Luffy about them, but now they could possibly be. You bastards, Ace yelled, and blindly dashed forward. He violently swung his pipe at the closest guy, which happened to be Koshiro, and missed. He kept swinging at the guy when he suddenly grabbed Ace's pipe. Ace struggled to get the pipe out of his grasp. Let go, Ace yelled and his vision swam. Oh, God. He was crying. He tried to hold back the tears as well as the growing sense of anguish that started to weigh down on his heart. Where are they? What did you do to them? Answer me, damn it, Ace yelled as he continued trying to get his pipe out of the dojo master's grasp. "Calm down. Your brothers are just fine. They're safe and sound in the forest," he said in a calm voice, and Ace's anger grew. He gave up on trying to free his pipe, and attempted to fight with his fists. He wasn't as experienced with fighting bare-handed, but I'll be damned if he went down without a fight. That's when someone grabbed him from behind, and held him in place. Ace struggled against the strong grip. He attempted to headbutt whoever it was that grabbed him. When that didn't work, he tried to kick them, but that also was a failure. He continued to struggle, all the while fighting away the urge to cry. He wasn't going to show weakness in front of these guys. "Listen to him. He's telling the truth. Go and check if you don't believe us," Marco's voice said, and Ace tried harder to kick him where the sun don't shine. "What's with him?" asked Zoro from the side, and Ace felt pure hatred rise up for the guy that led Luffy away from him and Sabo. If it wasn't for him, they would still be okay. It was all his fault. "You bastard. This is all your fault." Ace gave it his all to get out of Marco's grasp, and to attack the moss-headed idiot. "What are you talking about?" Zoro asked in an irritated tone. "He seems to be beyond reasoning," Koshiro said, and Ace attempted to bite Marco, but he couldn't bend his neck far enough. "He's very protective about his brothers," Marco said, and Ace would love nothing more than to bash all of their skulls in. "Let go of me so I can kick your asses," Ace yelled as he continued to struggle. "Maybe we should just bring him to them," Koshiro suggested. Ace's panic only grew. They wanted to rid him like they did Luffy and Sabo. Ace held back a sob as he thought of his brothers again. He vowed silently to them that he would avenge them, even if he had to fight these guys the whole way. And he would. XXXXXXXXX Luffy chowed down on his piece of the bear. He and Sabo had split the bear into thirds. One part they would bring to Ace after they ate. Luffy wanted more than what he got, but Sabo said that they could hunt more once they reunited with Ace. Luffy was excited to be hunting again. Sure, it was nice having someone cook for you, but he had missed the bonding he and his brothers did when they hunted their own meals. His thoughts were interrupted by some yelling in the distance. It sounded like Ace, and he sounded pissed. Luffy and Sabo looked at each other. Luffy then looked in the direction it was coming from, and wondered what happened that got Ace so worked up. The shouting got louder until Pineapple Head and the other guy walked into the clearing. The other guy had Ace's pipe in his hand, and Pineapple Head held Ace by his arms. Ace was kicking and screaming, but something seemed off. Luffy tried to pinpoint what it was when he realized that Ace had tears in his eyes. Luffy pouted at this. Ace always got onto him for crying, and now he was crying, himself. "Hey, how come you can cry, and I can't?" Luffy yelled, and down at Sabo and Luffy, and blinked a few times. He closed his eyes and shook his head, and looked at them again. He was released, and he just stood there as if he didn't believe what he was seeing. "What's with you? I don't think I've ever seen you so quiet," Sabo said with his brows drawn up in concern. "How come he gets to cry, and I can't? He's being a hipper." Luffy trailed off as he tried to think of the word. "Hypocrite?" Sabo asked, and Luffy nodded. "Yeah, that," Luffy said, and Ace slowly walked toward them. He then punched Luffy pretty hard. "Ow, what was that for, you jerk?" Luffy asked as he rubbed his head. "For running off when we told you time and again not to," Ace yelled with a shaky voice, and Luffy felt his annoyance melt away into worry. "Are you okay, Ace?" he asked. "I'm fine," Ace said, not looking at him. "Are you sure?" Sabo asked, and Ace only nodded. Sabo turned to the two adults and said, "Thanks for bringing him here. And I'm sorry for any trouble he might have caused." "He wasn't too much trouble. He just really cares for you too," the guy with the glasses said, and handed Sabo Ace's pipe. Ace shifted some when he said this. "Well, sorry anyways. And thanks again," Sabo said, and the adults nodded. They then left the three brothers alone in the clearing. Luffy turned to Ace, who was now sitting in front of the fire, playing with his portion of the bear. Luffy felt even more worried than before, and wondered what happened that caused Ace to act like this. He shared a concerned glance with Sabo before he sat next to his oldest brother. Sabo sat on Ace's other side. They sat in silence as they ate their meal slowly, for once. Luffy usually liked to talk and have fun, but he knew when he needed to be calm. And this was definitely one of those moments where he had to be still and just enjoy the presence of his two big brothers. "So, you were in the forest this whole time?" Ace asked after a while. It took Luffy a few seconds to realize that Ace was talking to him. "Yeah. The forest kept moving around, so me and Zoro kept ending up back here," Luffy explained. "Forests don't move around, Luffy," Sabo explained. "This one does," Zoro said. "So, Zoro couldn't find his way out of a paper bag," Ace said with a snort. "What's that supposed to mean?" Luffy asked. "It means, he's always getting himself lost," Sabo said and took a bite of meat. "In other words, the forests didn't move. He just led you in circles," Ace said. "Oh, I get it. Zoro's an idiot," Luffy said with one of his signature grins. "Like you're one to talk," Ace said, and playfully shoved Luffy. "Oh yeah?" Luffy asked, and shoved back. "Yeah," Ace said and shoved Luffy again. This started a play fight between the two. "Well, if you ask me, you're both morons," Sabo laughed. Luffy and Ace stopped their play fight, and looked at Sabo. They glanced at each other, and nodded with widening grins. They stalked up to Sabo, who realized what was going on, and started to back up. "Come on, guys. You aren't going to gang up on your favorite brother, are you?" Sabo asked while he put his hands up. "Favorite brother? Yeah right," Ace yelled and started to chase Sabo, who gave a small yelp before running away. Luffy laughed and helped Ace in his pursuit. They ran around the fire and their unfinished meals, laughing all the while. Sabo managed to dodge all of Ace's attempt to tackle him to the ground. This wasn't a surprise since Sabo was the fastest of the three of them. They weren't going to catch Sabo at this rate. Luffy then got an idea. He stopped chasing Sabo, and turned around. Sabo and Ace ran around the fire yet again, and Sabo was so focused on not letting Ace catch him that he didn't see Luffy in front of him until it was too late. Sabo gave a surprised yelp when Luffy tackled him to the ground. "Way to go, Luffy," Ace cheered, and Luffy smiled down at the blonde. "Okay, you've caught me. What are you going to do now?" Sabo asked. Luffy and Ace shared a devious smirk, and Ace flexed his fingers a few times. Sabo tensed as he realized what was about to happen. No, you wouldn't dare," Sabo said as Ace crept closer. "Guy, no, you know I'm ah-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha." Sabo burst into laughter as Ace and Luffy started to tickle him. Sabo squirmed this way and that, trying to get them to stop, but it only served to give them more tickle spots to attack. "Hey, alright. I give up, ha-ha-ha. I give up," Sabo yelled after a few minutes of being tickled. Luffy and Ace backed up, and gave Sabo room to sit up. His laughter trailed off as he wiped away some tears. Ace and Luffy grinned triumphantly. They had gotten the better of the smartest brother, and that was something that didn't happen often. Luffy smiled at his two brothers. Yeah, they got on each other's nerves from time to time, but there was no doubt that they loved each other. There wasn't anything Luffy wouldn't do for their sake, and he knew that they returned the favor. No matter how much they fought, he knew they would always have an unbreakable bond. And that bond would be something Luffy would cherish until the day he died. Ace walked through the village with determination. He and Zoro had sparred the day before, and he couldn't finish due to cramps. Today, however, he made sure he was ready to beat Zoro, and he wouldn't take him by surprise this time. "This is awesome. Another fight between Ace and my future swordsman," Luffy cheered from Ace's right. "I don't think he wants to join your crew, Luffy," Sabo said from Ace's left. "But he has to. He uses 3 swords, Luffy said with a small frown. "What does that have to do with anything?" Ace asked as they rounded a corner. 3 sword style is awesome," Luffy said as if that explained everything, and Ace rolled his eyes. They approached the gates to the Ishin dojo, and Ace tightened his grip around his pipe in anticipation. Today was the day he would show Zoro which of them was stronger. Sabo knocked on the gates, and they waited for an answer. "I don't see why we can't just walk in," Ace complained. "It's only polite. Yesterday was an emergency, but that doesn't give us the excuse to barge in today," Sabo said with a strict expression. Ace was about to retort something when the gates opened. Koshiro stood in the doorway, and Ace frowned at him. He had embarrassed himself in front of that guy yesterday by thinking he did something to his brothers, but the fact that Sabo and Luffy were okay didn't make him hate the old man any less. "Oh, you must be here to spar with Zoro. He told me about yesterday. Come on in. Zoro is preparing in the courtyard. Koshiro opened the gate further, and Ace eyed him for a few seconds. When the old man did nothing more than smile down at them, he walked forward. Luffy and Sabo followed him in. Koshiro closed the gates behind them, and took the lead. He led them behind the main building. Zoro was there practicing his swings on a training dummy. Zoro! Luffy ran forward before anyone could say anything, and tackled Zoro in a hug. Get back here, Luffy! Ace called out in annoyance. Why did his youngest brother insist on making friends with the oddest people? Get off me! Zoro yelled once his shock wore off. They're about to spar, Luffy. Let him go, Sabo said, and Luffy let go. He smiled at Zoro, who only frowned at him. You ready to lose, Greenie? Ace taunted. Zoro shifted his gaze to Ace, and his frown deepened. Bring it on, Freckles. He taunted back. Ace dropped his smirk, and narrowed his eyes. They glared at each other for a few seconds. Let's make it an honorable duel, now, Koshiro said, and led the two to the sparring arena. They stood apart from each other, and began to evaluate their opponent. Zoro was pretty strong, but he wasn't anything Aces hadn't seen before. Fighting larger-than-life animals can really make you question how strong is strong. Also, Garp's training only worked to make Ace even stronger. The only reason Zoro got the upper hand last time was because Ace underestimated him. That wouldn't happen this time. Begin, Koshiro stated, signifying the start of the sparring match. The two sides immediately launched at each other. Ace, already expecting a barrage of attacks, defended himself nimbly. He even managed to sneak a hit in here and there. Zoro jumped back, but Ace didn't give him any breathing room. He got a good hit on his ribcage, and he sent the smaller boy sailing across the arena. Zoro immediately got back up and eyed Ace. Ace charged forward, but Zoro managed to block his attack. He jumped back a good ways, and crossed his arms. He was going to use that same attack the unarmed Ace yesterday. Ace got in a ready positions. 3-sword style. Oni, Zoro rushed forward, but Ace was ready this time. He swung forward with enough force to break the wooden swords, and knocked the real sword out of Zoro's mouth. He knocked Zoro onto his back, and pointed the end of his pipe at him. I win. Ace smirked, and Zoro frowned. Rematch, he stated dryly. What? Ace raised an eyebrow. Rematch, right here, right now, Zoro said, and Ace's smirk grew. As you wish, but I'll just kick your ass again. Ace moved the pipe away, and allowed Zoro to grab his sword. Zoro turned to Sabo and Luffy and asked, Can I borrow your pipes? Why? Sabo asked, and stopped Luffy from handing his over. Because wooden swords are just going to break, and I'm not dumb enough to use them a third time, Zoro said, and held his hand out. Are you okay with this, Ace? Sabo asked. Sure, it'll be more of a challenge that way, Ace said with a shrug. With that, Sabo and Luffy handed over their pipes, and Zoro gave them a few practice swings. He seemed quite comfortable with the heavier weight of pipes despite the fact that the heaviest thing Ace had seen him wield was the real sword he put in his mouth. Zoro then faced Ace, signifying that he was ready. Begin, Koshiro said, starting the spar. Ace ran forward and swung his pipe. Zoro blocked it, and tried to get space between them. Ace, however, didn't let up. Zoro blocked a few more attacks before he used all his strength to push Ace away. Ace was taken by surprise of how strong Zoro really was as he slid back a few feet. Zoro crossed his arms again, and Ace rolled his eyes. Didn't this guy know any other moves? Ace got in a ready position. 3-sword style. Oni, Zoro ran forward, and Ace jumped to the side. All of Zoro's attacks missed. Ace swung at Zoro's exposed back. Zoro didn't react in time, and was pushed to the ground. Hey, is that the best you got? Ace taunted. Zoro quickly got to his feet and attacked Ace, who blocked the attack. Zoro kept swinging his weapons at Ace in a desperate attempt to land a hit on the freckled boy. Ace decided that he had enough, and swung his pipe with enough force to send Zoro sprawling on the floor. Ace was immediately on top of him. Zoro tried to attack while on the ground, but Ace hit Zoro's pipes hard enough to send them flying across the arena. Zoro narrowed his eyes at Ace. I win, again, Ace said, and let Zoro up. I want another rematch, Zoro said. What, now? Ace asked. Was this guy really so desperate to get his butt kicked? No, right before you leave this island. I need to be stronger if I want to beat you, Zoro said. Very well. Ace smirked and grabbed Sabo and Luffy's pipes. It's okay, Zoro, I can't beat Ace, either, Luffy said as he approached the green-haired kid, who only looked at him with an unreadable expression. You can't, huh? Zoro said in an unsurprised tone. Nope, but I'm getting stronger every day, and I'll beat him one of these days when I become Pirate King, Luffy said with a big smile, and Zoro's eyes widened slightly. Come on, Luffy. Let's go catch some lunch, Sabo called, as Ace handed him his pipe. Yeah, food, Luffy cheered, and ran toward his brothers. Zoro's eyes never once leaving his little brother. Ace eyed Zoro suspiciously. Just what did he want with his little brother? Let's go, Ace, I'm starving, Luffy said as grabbed his pipe. Ace looked down at his straw-hatted brother. When are you not hungry? Ace asked, and took the lead. She, Luffy laughed, and followed behind. They left the dojo, and started to make their way back to the forest. Marco and Thatch had offered to pay for a room for the three brothers, but Ace knew better than to trust those two. Instead, he and his brothers stayed in the forest. The forests back home were a lot more dangerous than anything this forest could offer. If anything, it was a peaceful home away from home. Do you think there are alligators here? Luffy asked. We'll have to do a bit more exploring before we know for sure, Luffy, Sabo said. I hope we find one. Luffy started to drool at the thought of eating gators again, and Ace silently agreed. They all missed the sweet taste of gator meat. We also need to start gathering enough food to last us another long journey, Sabo said. Where are we going next? Ace asked. Gecko Island, and that's a good 2 weeks worth of sailing, Sabo said, and Ace inwardly groaned at the thought of sailing that long with the Whitebeard pirates. He just knew they'd win, and Ace was sick and tired of it. The only bright side is that they seemed to leave him and his brothers alone while they were on an island. If only there was some way to give them the slip. Ace stopped and smirked to himself. He just got a brilliant idea. An idea that would surely rid them of the Whitebeard pirates for good. What's wrong, Ace? How come we stopped? Luffy asked. Oh no, I recognize that look. What are you planning? Sabo asked while pinching the bridge of his nose. I just got a great idea for getting rid of Thatch and Marco, Ace said while his devious smile grew. But I like Thatch and that other guy, Luffy pouted. Him name is Marco, Lu, Sabo said. Yeah, him, Luffy said, and Ace faced his naive brother. You want to have awesome adventures, right? Ace asked. Yeah. Luffy nodded. Well, we can't have proper adventures until we lose those two, Ace explained. But Thatch makes good food, Luffy continued to pout. You want to be king of the pirates, right? Well, you can't become king until you learn to sail on your own. And you can't do that until we're rid of the Whitebeard pirates, Ace said, starting to lose his patience. Luffy's expression changed from pouty to panicked. But I have to become king of the pirates, I promised Shanks, Luffy shouted. Then help us lose them, Ace said, and Luffy nodded vigorously. What do you have in mind? Sabo asked. Ace smiled and said, okay, here's the plan. XXXXXXXXX, man. I can't believe we missed it, Thatch said with his hands behind his head. Well, to be fair, I don't think Ace would want us there to watch his match with Zoro, Marco said. Yeah, but it'd have been a fun match to watch, Thatch pouted. They walked toward the docks in silence. Marco had heard about the match from Zoro, and Thatch wanted to watch. If anything, it would be nice to give the brat moral support. But they had gotten the time wrong, and they had missed the whole thing. Koshiro said that they would have one last rematch right before they left the island, so Thatch would make sure he got to see this match. They approached the docks, and Thatch noticed that something was off. It took a few seconds to realize that the brat's boat was missing. Thatch would have gone into panic mode had he not sensed the three of them behind a bush not too far from the shore. He and Marco shared a glance, and walked toward the bush. They know we're here, came Luffy's hushed voice. Shut up. No they don't, Ace said, and the sound of a fist hitting a rubber skull was heard. Yeah, we do, Marco said, and the three brats jumped in surprise. How did you know? Ace yelled with his usual glare. Do you really think you can trick seasoned pirates with a small trick like that? Thatch asked as he crossed his arms. I had a feeling that it wasn't going to work, Sabo said, standing up. But you guys had to fall for it. I can't become Pirate King until I learn to sail on my own, Luffy yelled as he, too, stood up. Aren't you sailing with your brothers, though? Marco asked with a raised eyebrow. Yeah. Luffy nodded. So you wouldn't be sailing on your own then, even if we did fall for your trick, Marco explained. Oh, okay. Luffy smiled. Why can't you just leave us alone? Ace yelled. Yeah, like we're going to leave 3 kids, who barely know anything about sailing, to sail the seas all on their own, Thatch said sarcastically, and Ace glared at him. Sabo sighed and said, Come on, Ace. We'd better put the boat back. Ace stared at the 2 Whitebeard pirates for several seconds before following Sabo. Luffy smiled up at them, and trailed behind Ace. After a few seconds the sound of a boat being pushed across the ground reached their ears. The boat soon appeared out of the foliage as the trio pushed the boat across the shore and into the water. Sabo helped Luffy into the boat before the sea could affect him, and the other 2 climbed in. It wasn't a bad idea. They would have gotten away with it if we didn't have observation hockey, Marco said, and Thatch nodded in agreement. They watched the brats use their pipes as oars, and paddled back to their spot at the docks. Once they got there, they tied up the boat and started to walk back toward the forest. Thatch couldn't help but wonder if this would be the last time they tried to lose him and Marco. XXXXXXXXX. Do you think he got lost again? Sabo asked from his spot on the boat. Probably. He is an idiot, after all, Ace said, as he stood on the dock, waiting for Zoro to show up. He also has to agree to join my crew, Luffy said. They had been on the island for 5 days, and now it was time to set sail. They had gathered all the food they needed for their trip to Gecko Island, and were ready to leave. The only thing holding them up was Zoro. He still had to join Luffy's crew. Luffy had been persistent. Every time they saw Zoro, he would run up to him and demand that he joined his crew, but Zoro always declined. If he didn't agree before they left, then he would just have to try again in 10 years. He really wanted Zoro to be his swordsman and first mate, and he wouldn't take no for an answer. There they are, Sabo yelled, and Luffy turned to face the village. Zoro and the guy with the glasses were walking towards them. Hi, Zoro. Are you ready to join my crew? Luffy called out with a smile, but Zoro merely ignored him. It's about time. I thought you had gotten lost again, Ace said, and Zoro frowned. What are you talking about? I don't get lost, Zoro said, and everyone just stared at him. Yeah, you do. You led Luffy in circles the first day we were here, Ace yelled after a few seconds. It's not my fault the trees kept moving, Zoro yelled back. Now, let's just get this duel over with, the glasses guy said patiently. Yeah. Can I borrow your pipes again? Zoro asked, turning to Luffy and Sabo. Luffy and Sabo handed their pipes to Zoro. He put the real sword in his mouth, and did a few practice swings to get used to them again. He then turned to Ace, letting them know he was ready. Begin, glasses guy said. They ran at each other, and attacked mercilessly. Zoro's swings were faster and stronger than they were a few days ago, but he was still no match for Ace. Ace blocked each attack effortlessly. They continued this pattern for a few seconds before Ace pushed Zoro back with a solid swing. Zoro slid back several feet. Ace dashed forward and attacked, but Zoro dodged to the side. Ace had left himself open, and Zoro took that opportunity. He hit Ace pretty hard on his side, which sent Ace to the ground. Ace got up immediately and attacked again. Zoro dodged again, but Ace was ready for him this time. He blocked Zoro's attack, and the 2 jumped back to reanalyze their opponent. After a few seconds, Zoro crossed his arms. 3-sword style. Oni, Zoro ran forward, a lot faster than he did the last several times he tried the move. Ace was barely able to block in time, and the force pushed him back. Jiri, Zoro said, and Ace quickly recovered. Do you know any other moves? Ace asked, and swung forward, and Zoro blocked the attack. They swung at each other several times before Ace hit hard enough to send Zoro over the dock, and into the water. Zoro was pushed out of the perimeter. Ace wins, Koshiro said, ending the match. Way to go, Ace, Sabo cheered. He was faster than I expected, Ace said, and watched as Zoro climbed back onto the dock. Zoro walked towards Sabo and Luffy, and handed them their pipes. He stared at Luffy for a few seconds and said, "Luffy, my dream is to become the world's greatest swordsman. That dream comes first before anything else. It doesn't matter to me if I fulfill that dream inside or outside the law. I plan on sailing out in about 8 years. I will not wait for you. However, if you can find me, and prove your strength, I'd be happy to call you my captain." Luffy blinked a few times, before a smile spread across his face. "I look forward to it," Luffy said, and Zoro walked away. Ace walked over to them, and they set sail. "Idea it, Luffy, but you managed to almost secure another crew member before you even sail out on your own," Sabo said. "Yup. I just need to get a lot stronger," Luffy smiled. "You'll have to do a lot of training if you want to pass his level of strength in 10 years. Thatch said, as their ship sailed up next to them. Ace growled something under his breath, and glared up at the two grown pirates. "Yeah?" Luffy cheered. Luffy didn't mind how much training he'd have to do to become stronger. He would do it, and Zoro would become part of his crew. He would make sure of it.